Are you ready for the movie of the week?
Let's do it. Let's plug in.
Plug in. All right, I'm plugged in and I have there's like a hole in the back of my head now, so all right. What are we talking about this week?
We are going back into the Matrix.
Okay. Now, this is a movie slash franchise that I have talked about on my channel before. I actually sent you I think you had seen it before, but we
hmm
were talking about my when The Matrix 4 was in the works. Um I decided I would do a bit of a retrospective on the franchise, um, basically giving my take on the spiritual views of the movie, but more so the political views of the movie, because I think the movies are, personally, I think the movies are extremely political, way more than people realized back in '99. Um,
Red pill or blue pill?
Red pill, blue. It became that's extremely ironic. Okay, you want to hear a funny story? We're probably gonna eventually talk about this happened on Twitter, I guess. But basically, obviously the red pill, blue pill uh, imagery basically exploded in pop culture, and most people know what that means. But it actually being red pilled, there was actually a movie by a former feminist called the Red Pill movie, um, and she basically described getting out of feminism as being red pilled.
Mm.
It actually became very much a trope of the right wing that you get out of the left wing cultural narrative and you become right wing. You're red pilled.
Mm.
And so in terms of internet memes, it's actually a pretty conservative meme, even though the
Interesting.
move. And so this was going around, and there was a point where, was it Elon Musk? Oh my gosh, we're gonna talk about Elon
It's
Musk.
all connected.
It's something we're getting these random. Might have been Elon Musk, but he said take the red pill on Twitter, and then Trump's daughter said I already have, and then one of the Wachowski siblings um, got on and said, um, "F both of you." Uh, but for some reason, I'm thinking Ted Cruz was involved in that conversation as well, but I'm not sure. I think I'm thinking of a different thing though. But yeah, and so apparently the Wachowskis. I'll just say the Wachowskis to avoid all the internet pitfalls. But uh, they have a very clear left wing political worldview. Um, and yet their imagery has been co-opted by people on the right wing. The Who siblings. Yes. Well, okay. I might as well put the issue with the siblings on the table. Um, Back in 1999, the Wachowski brothers, Larry and Andy Wachowski, created The Matrix. They were the writers, directors, and they did the whole trilogy. A few years later, they both transitioned, quote unquote, to being the Wachowski sisters, which is it's Lena and what were their names changed to? Lena and something I forget.
Yeah,
Um, Lily, maybe Lily.
maybe.
Lena. I don't know if it was they were two L's or whatever, but yeah, it's and so that gives you an idea of their worldview. I would say, obviously, it's more than just a worldview. It's a whole interpretation of your sexuality and your desires and everything that we could, but that's not necessarily the political landmine we want to walk into tonight. But we're definitely far more conservative, and so you can probably infer our opinions on it. But yeah, that kind of speaks to probably where we're going to go with the conversation about the movie tonight. So, what was your experience diving into the franchise? How far back does it go with you?
I did not see the Matrix until the '99 film, until I believe the second one came out.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
right before the second one. Um, Part of that was because I had a pretty sheltered upbringing as far as movies and things are concerned. So it really wasn't a surprise that I didn't see The Matrix when it first came out. But once, I was old enough to be able to watch films of that rating.
How old were you when they came out? 99?
When it came out 99, I would have been 15.
Interesting. I'm younger than you, but my
Yeah.
mom let us see it early because
Yeah.
okay, this was an interesting thing. Is this is something we'll probably talk about? The Matrix franchise has always had a very interesting relationship with Christians,
Yeah.
because of the amount of philosophical themes and religious, uh, let's say archetypes. I don't know, whatever fancy
Yeah.
words you want to use. That are intentionally crammed into the film.
Mhm.
Christians weren't making things up when they saw that.
Yeah.
It very clearly has uh, Christian imagery. I would say Christian themes
Yeah.
in terms of, I'll just say it that way. In terms of Neo being the one, and he is found, and he comes, and he sacrifices himself, is
Mhm.
resurrected, and
Very clear imagery
has
in
been
the moment of his
prophesied.
sacrifice. Yeah.
Yes, and he was prophesied. Um, and I would say if like the Matrix One was the end of everything, that probably would have stayed much more.
Mhm.
Whereas if you get into the second and third film, it is interesting. They did make the first movie because they weren't sure if they were going to be able to finish off the trilogy, um, and so they made the first movie pretty self-contained with a pretty clear
Yeah.
villain, hero, everything. But then that sort of shifts, I think, in the rest of the trilogy where they're not emphasizing the same things that you thought they were in the first
Right.
movie once you see the second, third movies. Um, yeah, but but it sounds like you saw them more as a unit. It's not because you saw
Yeah,
the
so
first
I
one.
was able to see them in order pretty quickly. So I saw The Matrix on DVD, and then I went to the theater for the second and third
Mm-hmm.
installments. And
Right.
I think it's funny, I talk about the sheltered aspect of it, but I think my mom actually had watched it
Right. My
on
mom had seen it, and she's
yeah,
like,
and she
I,
liked it,
"Yeah, mine did too. Exact same thing." Yeah. And she's like, this is so spirit. It's such a spiritual movie that I want my boys to see it.
Yeah, yeah.
um, and that's kind of how it was. And I remember like I had a pastor who it was like his favorite movie. We had a Christian friend I think we first saw it when a Christian friend of ours down the road recommended it. And so it was very much floating around Christianity and had that
Yeah. Yeah.
had that reputation about it. Now, if you've seen my video, um, sort of I wouldn't even say it's a hot take at this point, what my hot take is, but what was sort of your experience of interpreting the movie?
Um I mean, I saw some of the imagery, but I never got into the Christianization of it.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that, like, I knew enough of the Wachowskis at that time to know that they were not believers and to know that their political worldview was vastly different than my own. And so my assumption was they're not making a Christian film. They might be borrowing some motifs here and there,
Yeah,
and maybe very much intentionally to flip it on its head, if you will.
yeah,
But I, in some ways, I've always been bothered by the Finding Jesus in the Matrix type books that would come out, and I think it shows a trend in Christianity where the way we embrace culture has to be from the side of this was made directly for me,
uh huh.
rather than just being able to take something, enjoy it, and that be the end of it.
Yeah, the tricky thing with the Matrix is how intentional it is.
Yeah.
In that, a lot
And
of the
I
time,
get, yeah, I can definitely see why that one muddies it a bit.
yeah, yeah, because there are so many movies where it's like it's clearly there's like either like no intentional Christian connections or anything like that, um, or it's the opposite, and Christians are trying to force it. Whereas with the Matrix, it's like it is borrowing from Christianity. It's very clearly
Hmm.
intentionally putting in a Christ figure motif throughout the movie. But the problem is, it's actually far more subversive than that. It's like there is a to if I'm gonna just interpret like the first movie, I mean it carries on throughout all of them, but like there is a uh you'd say fallenness aspect to it, and a salvation aspect to it, a redemption aspect to it, and a Christ figure aspect to it. That's very clearly there. But what is that symbolizing for the Wachowskis? Is the question. What do they see as the fallen nature of humanity? What do they see as salvation from that fallenness? And because it's symbolic, you can see it as symbolizing whatever you want, and so it very clearly can be mapped onto Christianity. But it's not a mystery what they see it as symbolizing. They've talked about it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what my video was about, sort of. But what have you been clued into? I don't want to go on a massive rant
Yeah, I mean,
yet, but
so I think it became a little bit clearer in the next couple of films for me, at least, that it was less about a traditional salvation type of thing, rescuing people from despair or, whatever. It was more about, you're dealing with some, I don't know, overtly heavy-handed worldview things. Like there's I guess freedom in the system that they're promoting, and what I would see as more of the traditional values that they were coming against as being the more oppressive regime.
Yes.
And probably the result even of how humanity ended up as a battery.
Right. Yeah, and so there were I basically see it, and this has become more relevant now, partially by taking into account some things I've been listening to. Whoops, I'm typing on the other screen here. Didn't mean to do that. I can't I mean, you've heard me go on about this, but I can't recommend enough people listening to James Lindsay's New Discourses podcast if you want to know what's been happening in like university education. But basically the long history of Marxism in American education, and how it's impacting our politics today and our cultural things today. But as I've listened to James Lindsay, what he's sort of given me some backstory on pretty clearly is the history of neo-Marxism and how it's shifted in the universities from what they would call like vulgar Marxism, where it's very focused on economics originally with Marx. But then you get to like Gramsci today, and then Herbert Marcuse as a big name in like the 60s, led a student revolt and things like that. They're very interested in not seizing the means of economic production, but cultural production. And they talk a lot about, I think the biggest sort of single term I could use that I think the Matrix is talking about is false consciousness. In other words, I guess Gramsci. This is very secondhand. I'd go back to Lindsay. He does a good job reading the original sources and talking about them. But this is my secondhand account of all of this. But I guess Gramsci was one of the sort of neo-Marxists who was trying to explain why sort of the predictions of the original Marxists failed, because they said, oh, there's going to be this revolution of the proletariat, basically, and they're going to seize the means of production, and there's going to be a revolution, this economic revolution that eventually leads to communism. And Gramsci was explaining why that didn't happen. His explanation was people think they're happy in capitalism. People think they're happy, and it's because they're fooled by what's called the hegemony, this sort of cultural atmosphere that they're in. They have this system they're in, and they're being fooled into thinking they're happy, and so they need to be made critically conscious, basically. I don't know if critical consciousness was Gramsci's word, but that's eventually how it was described. But the idea is you need to break out of this system and realize you're not happy. You need to realize and be told that you're being oppressed. And when you break out of that and see all of these modes of oppression in culture, then you become critically conscious and you no longer have a false consciousness. I think that's what the Matrix is about. And so fallenness for the Wachowskis and for Marxists or neo-Marxists is you're oppressed and you're trapped in a system that you were born into that oppresses you, and you don't even realize how oppressed you are. And to take the red pill in their sense is to see that for what it is and to become active and conscious of it. Um,
So
and
do you think in believing that perhaps that is possibly one of the reasons they've gone as far as even having the gender issues that they have,
well,
because
these are all that's queer theory, and so yes, critical queer theory is what you might call it. But all of these schools of thought that are connected to this, um, all of these schools of thought that are connected to this are often called critical theory. So you hear it in the news all the time now, critical race theory. But it's coming out now, like that like Black Lives Matter, these organizations like that claim to speak for the oppressed, they actually have a certain amount of corruption and connection with them to these other movements. And so, for some odd reason, you look at the Black Lives Matter website and they have all of this connection to um, queer theory movements and the LGBTQ, et cetera, movement. Um, is because it's not just that they're wanting to be against racism, it's that they see sort of all of Western capitalistic society as, by definition, at its root, inescapably oppressive. And these critical theories are applying that to different things. In one sense, you have it with race. It's not just that they agree with us that racism is bad; they have a whole worldview connected to that. Um, and then you take that over to queer theory, and queer theory ultimately is a war on anything that you would say is the normal. Really, it's like
okay.
you as a straight white male think you have the market cornered on normalcy. We're going to basically make war on all of that, and we're going to apply it to sexuality as well. And so it's seen as a oppressor oppressed dynamic, but in just these different areas of study. We have it in race, and now we also have it in gender. We have it in feminism. A lot of this branched out of feminism in the 80s and connected, but these are all very academically connected. You see a lot of the names connecting with each other. And again, I can't say it all from memory, but James Lindsay's podcast goes so in depth in terms of the specific academic. He'll just take an academic paper from 80s, 90s and talk about it and just read it and translate it basically into layman's terms. But yeah, but anyway, because like you mentioned, we so clearly see the overt political leanings of the creators,
Yeah.
and it's not a stretch to say that this is what the Matrix is about.
But I
Um,
feel like a lot of what you just described became very prominent, especially in the fourth film. It's like
yep.
the shades were uh, pulled or something. I don't know what you want to call it. The covers were removed. It became very clear. I mean, they started talking about like the evil systems that were binary by nature, and it's like, oh, come on.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it becomes overt once you see it. Like I
Yeah.
was surprised. Actually, I didn't think the fourth movie didn't go as far as I thought it would. Honestly,
Yeah.
I was expecting a lot just because of what's happened between the original trilogy and now. I figured, oh, they're just going to go whole hog, and in some ways they did. For me, it was more aesthetically, however you want to say it. It was more along those lines. Like you could see it in terms of
Hmm.
the characters and the way things but a lot of it still was kind of just hidden under certain phrases if you know
Yeah,
what
I,
they're
I
saying.
guess I felt it was less hidden. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they didn't go as far as one would expect, but
Well,
I felt like
I was
it was less
expecting like
hidden.
yeah, I was expecting honestly it was going to be something like half the cast would be overtly identifying as all of these uh these sexual identities and things like that, but it wasn't
Sure.
quite that extreme, but it was there if you wanted to see it.
Yeah.
It was there.
Overall, it just was not a good film.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's
Agreed.
best to leave well enough alone with the
Yeah,
trilogy ending.
yeah.
Not that I was a fan of the ending of the third film.
Hmm. The fit
I
Nick,
actually, when I saw it in the theater, movie ended, and I stood up. I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
yeah.
Like out
I
loud.
I felt some of that with. I mean, I tried to like it more. I mean, I didn't. I don't know. It was okay. I didn't
It
hate it as
it
much as
was
some
it
did.
was really just the last scene for me.
Yeah,
It was the last, well, maybe not last scene, last 5-10 minutes. I
yeah.
was just like, really? Like that's where this ends.
Well, yeah. And the thing is, it got a little bit too philosophically opaque, if that's the way you want to say
Yeah.
it. Um, but also there was a disjunction, like I mentioned before, between the first movie and the rest of the trilogy, I think, in that they had a pretty binary good and evil, if you want to, good and evil and everything, but it became much more relativistic and like questioning the good and evil of both the humans and the machines toward the end of it. And so it didn't have that emotional climax of good defeating evil the way you were expecting. And it plays out that way, and you go, huh. I think, and some of it was just the plot was a little confusing by the end, and figuring out where the philosophy comes in and where the plot connects to it, and
Yeah.
what is even just on a factual level happening at the end.
Yeah.
Like that's just in and of itself, like, okay, I think it is satisfying enough if you just understand what happened, but it was just kind of opaque, not even just the themes, but what happened, what's going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. As far as the things that I enjoyed, like getting into the series, I enjoyed the first film and things like that. I was at a period of time in my life where I was really getting into like Isaac Asimov and things like that. So like, you have this whole
he
like
did Dune,
I've actually never read Dune.
but that's him. That's him.
No, no, that was
Oh darn it! No, I'm getting...
Herbert or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
Herbert. No, what did Isaac Asimov do?
He's most known for in like current pop culture for iRobot, which Will Smith did a pretty terrible version of.
You didn't like that movie? I thought it was
No,
okay.
I actually liked the movie, but if you read any of the
books, in
books,
terms of its comparison, okay.
Yeah, it's just like, really, that's what you could come up with. But as a separate movie, it's actually enjoyable.
Okay. Well, I've never read the books, so
the books are excellent. So iRobot actually was a series of short stories, not just one particular story. So they didn't actually do like a disservice to a certain book by any means. They actually wrote a specific story that was not one of Asimov's works. So it's just based on compilation of his works. But like I really got into this idea of, like dystopian futures and things like that. And I loved the concept of like a robot uprising. Like that was a very intriguing notion to me. And so that was one of the things that drew me into the Matrix, so to speak.
Right. So just objectively speaking, like, do you like the Matrix universe as an idea?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I think, it's a compelling storyline. I mean, and if it had stopped with the third film, I probably would be okay. Like, obviously, I see certain things that on a philosophical level I disagree with.
Yeah.
But, I can enjoy something, although it was tainted further with the fourth, that just kind of goes, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say if you watch the Animatrix, which I did.
Yeah.
You do dig a little deeper into probably some of their philosophical leanings.
Sure.
Just done in a more artistic way, I would say. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I still have no problem watching them.
Sure.
But it's got to be an eyes wide open thing too.
Yeah.
For us, let's not be consumers that are just blindly consuming.
Right. What was I going to say? That just does remind me. Have you read or watched Ender's Game?
Yes.
Okay. I only ask that because I think I want to talk about that in a future
That'd be a good one. I've read all the books.
I've only read the first one, which I love. And the movie was, well, we could talk about that. It only qualifies. Only qualifies because there is a movie. But
yeah. I watched the movie first.
Oh.
And I enjoyed the movie.
Okay, well, yeah.
Then I read the books.
So that's probably a better way to do it.
But it did make me then enjoy the movie less.
Right. But at least you got a chance to enjoy the movie.
Yeah.
I didn't. I saw it afterwards.
Yeah.
But I didn't hate the movie. But yeah, just certain aspects of the story that just can't work when you don't have the kids aging the way they do in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The other a similar vein that happened to me with the movie and the book series, The Giver. Both again, same thing. I enjoyed the movie, then I read the books.
I'm trying to think if I saw The Giver.
A lot more.
I might have seen The Giver. I'm not sure. But
it's on a streaming site now. I can't remember which one has it, but it's good.
Yeah. Okay, so sort of in summary here, how should Christians engage with the Matrix? What's sort of the summary Christian take on it? I mean,
Yeah.
you said a little bit how you feel
Yeah.
about watching it, but
So I think it's one of those things like let's stop trying to slap a Christian label on it. Um, we can see the Christian imagery and see
mhm,
what it's worth because again, coming back to something we've said multiple times, the greatest story is the story of redemption. It's interwoven into human history by our Maker. It's a story that's been woven into um, kind of the collective knowledge of the world. No
mhm,
one is without excuse. So we are aware of this as the story. We may not know all the details, but it is woven in, and so every story of good versus evil pulls from that. However, we need to have our eyes open when we consume any type of entertainment that there might be a conflicting worldview. And that's probably my biggest reason for not enjoying or not appreciating the books and movies that come out following something like this that is like slapping Jesus in the Matrix. And it's like, just
mhm.
enjoy the film for what it is and
Yep.
be aware of what it is, and quit trying to sell everybody on its evangelistic merits.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, what? Well, that's funny though. I did talk to a guy when I was overseas in Bosnia who got saved shortly after watching The Matrix, and he credited
Hey,
it to the way that The Matrix opened up his mind. So, whoops,
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
whoops,
maybe I'm
Wachowskis.
wrong.
But that's not no. But I do agree with you. But that is something I mentioned in the previous week. Was like there. I think there is such a thing as redeeming culture, but to me, that's not what that means.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, Forcing something to be more Christian than it is even wanting to be. Sometimes the media itself is like wanting the opposite and you're being attacked and you don't want to acknowledge it, you know.
right.
But yes, there is, yeah, I think it's an enjoyable franchise with eyes whether your eyes are wide open to it or what it is or not. So even after you see the issues with it, it's still fun and
Yeah.
engaging.